Tonight, the killing of a grandmother and an alleged carjacking in Queensland. Do the suspects who stole her car raise again questions about our immigration intake? And why woke doesn't work? Victorian police attacked as they march in solidarity at a gay pride march. Plus, Lisa Wilkinson's new defence in the Bruce Lehrmann defamation case. She was just reading the script. So why did she grab the Logie for breaking the story? And China sentences an Australian dissident to death. Why are some people so blind to this new Nazi regime? Also, a shock poll on the royal family. Well, it's a shock to Harry and Meghan, I'm sure, and to Republicans who thought that the Queen's death was their big chance. But first, and before I get to the Albanese government telling yet another falsehood in the race wars, this time about Indigenous leader Lower Joe Donoghue, who died yesterday, let me ask it something. Didn't anyone in the Albanese government tell Chris Bowen, the Energy and Climate Change Minister, shush, put a sock in it, Chris. Don't tell punters today of all days that you're going to make cars a luxury for the poor. I mean, what a clown show. The government is crowing about today's news poll. Look, we got away with a lie. We broke a promise to keep the stage 3 tax cuts. We instead robbed better off Australians of thousands of dollars to give a few, what was it, middle Australians $15 a week, something like that. And yesterday's news poll does show that nearly 2/3 of voters think that was actually good of the government to do this. But like I predicted, they liked the cash. But also, like I predicted, they're not so keen on the liar who gave it to them. And that's why even after this tax break of billions of dollars in total, the government's polling exactly what it was before the Christmas break. It's still just ahead of the coalition, 52% to 48% after preferences. I find that astonishing. I reckon he must have been counting on a big bounce, but it's destroyed its credibility. It looked like a liar to stay exactly where it was. And we still haven't heard what the opposition will do, by the way. That's going to be decided in a leadership meeting tonight. And the Liberals could actually still trump Labor, you see. They could say, well, we'll keep those stage 3 tax cuts, that Labor promised before the election, but we'll match Labor's tax cuts, extra tax cuts to the less well off. Yes, it will cost the bomb. But the Liberals, by doing that, would also slash the bracket creep by having a flat tax between $45,000 and people on $200,000, instead of being like Labor, keeping in the middle a 37% tax rate that will rake in $28 billion more in bracket creep over the next decade as inflation and pay rises push millions of Australians into that higher bracket. So that would actually be real tax reform from the Liberals, right? But we'll see what it'll do. That said, Labor's pitch today is that, well, yes, we've not broken our promise. We've taken a different decision to help Australians with their cost of living.
Every taxpayer deserves a tax cut, and we're going to give it to them.
Now, that applause was from Labor politicians, by the way, not a grateful public. But then along came Chris Bowen to spoil Labor's party. You're going to have to save up that $15 a week extra from Labor because, boy, you're going to need it to pay a lot more for a new car now. Bowen, who's a real global warming zealot, is bringing in new emissions laws on new cars to force car companies to sell more electric cars and fewer of the cheaper petrol ones, especially utes, that are the most popular cars in the market.
There are many efficient options that aren't available in Australia as well. Take the Mazda CX-30. The model available in the United Kingdom is 25% more fuel efficient than the model available here in Australia. So Australians are missing out on savings at the Bowser, regardless of what sort of car they choose. And of course, also Australian cars are emitting more into the environment and emitting more particulates and pollution, which is having an impact on the health of Australians as well.
Now, Bowen says he's not going to be banning any of the cheaper petrol cars that buyers actually want, but that's not exactly true, because this changes mean the car companies will have to do that. They can't sell too many petrol cars because they will then have an emissions limit put on their total sales of each category. Too many petrol cars means they're going to break it and have to pay extra to the government. So it's a clever scheme, right? But for many new car buyers, it means they won't actually be able to find all the cheaper petrol cars they actually want year in, year out. And that's when most electric cars cost so much more.
So when we look at the EV equivalents that are available right now, so one of our most popular ute until last year, when the Ranger took it over, was the Hilux dual cab. You can get one of those for 52 grand. The equivalent EV ute dual cab is a Chinese model at $94,000. So whilst you may not be paying fuel excise if you go to an electric model, your family still has to find an additional $40,000 to purchase that car.
Now, the crazy thing about Bowen's plan is that how much does it really help the planet anyway? Electric cars use electricity to come 2/3 from fossil fuels, and they take a lot more fossil fuels to actually make. And how much does it help buyers? Electric cars cost more, repairs cost more, insurance costs more, and their range is less. And can we even get all these electric cars? I mean, 90% of all new car sales by 2030.
It might be a challenge to actually produce vehicles that meet these stringent targets, especially as we go out beyond 26 and 27. The targets become very stringent, and the current car park that we sell, the cars we sold last year, certainly wouldn't meet it. So it's a question of whether we can bring that technology, and given that we are a relatively small portion of the world market, we're less than 1.5%, we're right-hand drive, it's going to be difficult to necessarily source those cars and bring them to Australia at a price point Australians can afford.
What, you mean this government might be forcing us to buy cars we can't actually get or afford? Surely they couldn't be that dumb, could they? Surely they could. What's more, it's pushing us to buy electric cars. Well, that seems idiotic when we're warned that we're already short of electricity. So as I say, the government gives with one hand and takes with the other. It gives $15 a week for cost of living with that one hand, and on that sneaky other, it makes new car buyers potentially pay thousands more. But also today, just briefly, from this government that couldn't tell us the truth about its promised tax cuts. If there's one topic, apart from global warming and our tax cuts, where you couldn't trust politicians to tell you the truth, it's race politics. Now, Lower O'Donoghue died on the weekend, the Indigenous leader. She came from absolutely nothing to first be a nurse and eventually the first chairman of ATSIC, for instance, a top Aboriginal body back then. Inspirational story. Here's some of what the Albanese government's Indigenous Affairs Minister, Linda Burney, however, wrote about Lower O'Donoghue. At 2 years old, she was taken away from her mother in remote South Australia and placed in a mission home where her name was anglicised and she was prohibited from speaking her own language. The matron of Coldbrook Children's Home in South Australia, where she grew up, told her that she wouldn't amount to anything. Now, almost everything there is false or dubious, much like the government's spin on The Voice. It's true that Lower O'Donoghue herself claimed for quite a while to be of the stolen generation and even headed the National Sorry Day Committee. But as some of her acquaintances and a relative confirmed to me, she was not stolen. Her white father, who wanted to shoot through, sent her and all of her brothers and sisters, bar one, to a home in South Australia run by two remarkable women, Sister Rutter and the matron, Sister Hyde, who devoted their lives to helping Aboriginal children who were abandoned or neglected or sent to them for an education. Children like Lower, here in the red. Now, I eventually did ask O'Donoghue to confirm my information. She admitted, yes, I don't like the word stolen, and it's perhaps true, absolutely true, that I've used the word loosely at times. I would see myself as a removed child and not necessarily stolen. Well, removed by her father, that's not stolen at all. In fact, another girl at the home at the time, Faith Thomas, who became a bowler in the Australian women's test team, remembers that home very differently.
Had I not been in Coldbrook, I would never have got the opportunities that I did have. So I consider myself not stolen, but chosen.
Now, far from being told they were no good, the girls were given the skills to earn their own living quite deliberately. As Faith Thomas also put it, what we had was constant love and attention from these two remarkable ladies, Sister Rutter and Sister Hyde. Now, the fact that O'Donoghue went so far in her career and gave so much is a tribute to what the sisters at Coldbrook taught her. And that real story, not the one from the Indigenous Australians Minister, tells a very different and better one than this government tries to keep telling us. Joining me is the panel, Michael Krakue, former Victorian Liberal Party President, and Stephen Conroy, former Labor Senator and Cabinet Minister. Stephen, today's news poll, shouldn't the government have got more of a lift in its support after throwing billions of dollars at tax cuts to millions of people in Middle Australia?
Look, part of the problem of today's media splintering is that messages take longer to get through. So I'm not sure I ever, even going back 10 years before social media was such a dominant paradigm, that I never believed that Newspoll would capture something within a week or two. So I think the pluses or the negatives of this package won't start showing up in the Newspoll for another couple of weeks. Ask people an opinion about what do you think about getting more money in the pocket, and surprisingly 65% of Australians said we think that's a good idea.
Yeah, so what I take from what you're saying is that you'd actually want more of a lift than you've seen, but you're hopeful that in time you will get it. Have I summarised that well?
Quite well, Andrew.
No.
Long after the tax cut has been spent and forgotten, the lie will be remembered, and the fear of a repeat of 19 will be remembered by the electorate. I mean, when you look at the sloppy, embarrassing, nervous answers given by Katie Gallagher and Chalmers to questions about negative gearing, capital gains tax, franking credits, etc.
We've got no plans yet.
No plans. How hollow, how pathetic. I mean, how believable are those answers? People are, pocketing the tax cut. At the same time, they're looking at those answers thinking, I'm not going to believe a word these people tell me ever again on tax.
But Michael,
that's the problem.
This poll really seals it. When you've got 62% of Australians polled, apparently by Newspoll, saying they support this tax plan, there's no way for the Liberals to oppose it.
No.
Is there? So what are they going to do?
They're going to have, exactly as you said, I think they have to support it and also support the full implementation of the stage 3 tax cuts that they took to 2 elections effectively. So that's what they're going to have to do.
So
It'll be a great increase.
Well, look, that'll be a
but that's
Christmas
what they've got to do.
I mean, if Peter Dutton decides that his major spend in the next coming election is to reintroduce the $30-odd billion to the wealthier as from 150 up, if that is their priority, fantastic. That is a Christmas present for Albo.
It's just restoring a promise.
It's
sides
a Christmas present
plus
for
looking
Albo,
after the poor.
because that's $30 billion they're not going to spend anywhere else.
But if it was
if they want to lock it in,
if it was that alone,
and try and sell that, they're selling to 40%.
Don't forget they've already implemented stage 1 and stage 2. So no one was complaining about that. No one was really complaining about 3 when the whole thing was announced.
Michael, I hope they adopt your policy. It's a Christmas present.
Well,
I think they will.
I mean, let me be clear. I have sat in cabinet, more importantly in shadow cabinet, when you get these sort of choices, and they are shocking choices. Do you
think the Liberals should do what the Labor did? Like, promise something and then break their promise afterwards because you had never had any intention?
Well, let's be clear.
It seems to work
if Peter
for Labor.
Dutton doesn't do what Michael said...
Now, do you think the Labor...
If Peter Dutton doesn't do what Michael said and you're advocating, then they will be breaking their promise to
Correct.
they took
That's
to
correct.
election.
Are you advocating that the Liberals do what the Labor Party did and lie shamelessly through their teeth and break their promise afterwards?
Unless Peter Dutton, Dutton does exactly what you're advocating, they are going to have...
We got away with it.
They're going to be engaged in the exact conduct you're criticising Labor for.
Which you think is good, right?
No, I think it's good. 60% of the Australian public support the change.
You do think it's good. OK, rightio. Well, that's exactly what I think. This is how politics gets devalued.
Correct.
Labor does it and then thinks, defies the Liberals to do the same. But whose idea was this really, this breaking of the promise? We talked on the show last week with Cameron Milner, that apparently, he says, he's got good mail, Chalmers,
no, he doesn't.
isn't talking too much to Albo. There's tension. And partly because Albo seems to get the blame. Now, for breaking the promise, the funny thing is, of course, that Albanese at the National Press Club last week did actually want all the credit for these cuts. Here he is.
I recognise, as the Treasury analysis confirms, working households have experienced the fastest rise in their cost of living. That's why over summer I asked Treasury and Finance to present us with options to help people with their cost of living, whilst importantly continuing the fight against inflation.
What a man, all out of his own idea, sitting there and sends the order out, look for an option. But today the Deputy Secretary of the Treasury claims, wow, that idea actually first came to them from the Treasurer and in fact from the Reserve Bank Secretary.
The Secretary had been thinking about how to provide cost of living relief in a way that didn't add to inflationary pressures. He was interested and had mentioned to us around roughly the same time that he would like the department to think about whether adjusting the personal income tax rates and thresholds could provide broad-based relief to all taxpayers.
So whose call do you think this really was, and does it matter?
I don't think it was Albo's, to be honest. He's got about as much interest in economics as Gough Whitlam had. I mean, quite frankly, Andrew, he was not sitting there in his lounge chair in the backyard over Christmas thinking, I must ring Treasury and ask. I mean, Albo's not thinking that. For goodness' sake,
you're not saying
because he was trying to. You see, one of Labor's problems is people are asking, what's this government for? Why is this government there? He's trying to create some sort of thing that, you know, he's for tax reform. He's ahead of the game. He's a visionary. He's ringing Treasury. He's in charge. He's another Paul Keating
in this country. That's what Albo's about. This is just such a ludicrous conversation. You just got to try and find anything to try and back up your argument.
Albo is a plotter. Let's be honest. He's a plotter on the he's a plotter on the treadmill of life, who's happened into this position. Hawke and Keating would look at him and say, there have been better days for Labor, wouldn't they?
Probably can accept, but really. But listen, I need to ask you before we run out of time. Chris Bowen, someone's got to put him in another ministry where it's not going to create the government too much problem. But
immigration, Andrew, put him in immigration.
But the
Prime Minister announced the tax emission stuff is over the weekend or late last week. So Bowen was just going further, as in explaining the details of what was announced on the fuel emissions.
Now you've got to tell me that
this was actually announced the other day. No, I'm saying no, it's just a factual statement. Like, the PM gave an indication about the fuel emission stuff. I think it was on the weekend.
What
Chris
did
Bowen
Chris
came out
Bowen
and
tell
fleshed
me
it
to
out.
say? All right, car plan. Do you think it's a good idea to make cars more expensive and force people onto it?
Look, I don't take my best guess from Cameron Milner like you guys have been so far.
He hasn't talked about cars. I'm asking you about cars.
The PM made the announcement on the weekend, and Bowen's then come out and fleshed it out. That's the job of ministers.
We got that bit. More electric cars.
No, but this has been coming.
It's a great idea.
Well, this has been coming for the last 18 months. This has been a Labor stated policy for 18 months. It's not Frankenstein. What's Frankenstein? Are you trying to pretend today's tax cuts have been eaten up by some car purchase in 7 years' time?
Yes.
7 years' time.
Well, before then, it's ratcheting up. The tax is coming now.
The tax cuts now.
No,
the tax cuts now.
Car thing.
The car thing in 7 years' time suddenly wipes out your tax cut in the year.
I tell you what, by then your $15 won't have gone.
So you can't put the two of them together and pretend that it's one hand on the other hand.
Andrew,
it's one hand today.
Someone needs to ask Chris Bowen, does he still believe in the tax cuts, the tax increase policy he took to the 2019 election? Does he still believe in his heart?
Well,
does he support those?
He's the climate change minister.
He's a member of the cabinet, though. He's in the cabinet. He's got a vote on it. He's in the cabinet.
Michael Kroger, Steve Conroy, thank you very much to you both. I hope we got some of those lines through all the counter talk. Really appreciate that. After the break, China shows its utter contempt for Australia and our government by sentencing an Australian dissident to death. Plus, how Joe Biden mucked up his strike against terrorists backed by Iran. Now, so much for China treating us with more friendliness and respect under this Albanese government. And so much for the fools who tried to tell us that China isn't that bad. We should just shut up, we can get along, sell more stuff. Today we learn that China has sentenced to death an Australian democracy activist, Yang Hengjun, a former Chinese citizen. China accuses him of spying without ever publicly presenting any evidence. Evidence instead that it's tortured him. It's held him for years now. Former Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, was cross.
The Australian government is appalled at this outcome. We will be communicating our response in the strongest terms. As a first step, I have directed my secretary to summon China's ambassador to Australia to express our objection.
Joining me is the country's top foreign affairs writer, Greg Sheridan of The Australian. Greg, China says it's going to commute the sentence to life imprisonment if Yang Hengjun behaves himself over the next 2 years. But really, your verdict and what he did?
Well, Andrew, this is China, and I'm astonished people are surprised about it. This is the Communist Party of China. It shows complete and absolute contempt for Australia. This is an Australian citizen who has done nothing worse than criticise the Chinese Communist Party and the government. He's a writer and a dissident, and not only has he got this insane sentence, the death sentence now apparently to be commuted to life imprisonment, at no point has the Chinese government honoured its international treaty obligation to allow Australian consular officials to attend the trial or anything like that. So they've flouted their treaty obligations. They couldn't care less about human rights, and this is a deliberate statement. So they let Cheng Lei go free. Thank God. I'm so pleased. And now they're saying, OK, we can give you something and we can smack you around the face as well. And it's completely arbitrary. Could be, you know, if you or I were silly enough to go there, could be you or me.
I wouldn't now. And if I was Chinese-born and an Australian citizen, I most definitely would not go. But what does it say about a relationship now with China?
Well, they realised that when they were naked in their bullying, it was counterproductive for them. And all through that period, it was obvious that at some point they'd get sick of that phase and they'd move into charming us again. But it means nothing. Underneath the substance, the cyber attacks are relentless, the attempted political interference is relentless, the military moves, as they showed by pointing that sonar at our sailors, are relentless. The stealing of all our industrial and military secrets is relentless. And what I think is very dangerous is that the Albanese government, except for Penny Wong's very fine statement today, and she deserves all praise for that, the Albanese government generally now won't speak in a disobliging way about China because it thinks that having reset the relationship with China is its only single remaining foreign policy achievement. But as a result, a lot of Australians, including a lot of business folks, of course, think that everything's hunky-dory in China and that we should just go back to having a normal relationship. But they are a nation whose central strategic interests are inimical to our own.
Well, you say, you praised Penny Wong's statement. It's true, she dragged in the Chinese ambassador. But I have to say, while she said that the sentence was appalling, she said nothing about anything about the nature of China, its system, and say the man's innocent and all that. She could have gone to town and she did not. She's appalling and she wants an explanation from China. There is no explanation. She should be stripping pieces off him. But listen, there are now 3 wars that the West has been dragged into, right? Ukraine, Israel, and the war to preserve shipping lanes in the Red Sea, which goes into the Suez Canal, very important shipping lane. Houthi rebels have been firing missiles and rockets at ships there, anything really, hit a British tanker. On Friday, the US and Britain attacked targets in Yemen, Syria, and Iraq. They were all being used by Islamist groups backed by Iran, one of which had killed 3 US servicemen in an attack last week. This is in retaliation for that. And it's done that, but it doesn't seem to be working much, Greg. I mean, I saw in one target in Iraq, I wonder, only, 16 dead of this really important target. And I wonder whether it's because President Biden said, he gave him a week's notice, almost a week's notice, and said the day before the attacks were going to hit targets in Iraq and Syria. Would that have anything to do with that?
Oh, well, you're absolutely right, Andrew. I mean, I think this is essentially a symbolic retaliation by Biden. So Biden deserves high marks for his solidarity with Israel. He's much better than the Democratic Party. It may be because he was never educated at Harvard, he still works out that if an Islamist death cult attacks a liberal democracy, you go with a liberal democracy. However, his policy on Iran has been an unmitigated disaster. He just wanted to reverse Donald Trump's policy, and he spent nearly 3 years trying to woo Iran into a nuclear deal which was meant to be a détente. Now, this has freed up, he hasn't enforced sanctions on Iran. It's freed up $100 billion worth of funds for Iran, which they've used to build up their military and support terrorism. And now, before this retaliation, Iran-backed militia groups had attacked American targets, not just Israeli or international targets, American targets, 160 times. Now, finally, they got a drone through the American defences and killed 3 American soldiers. And so Biden was forced to respond. And his message is, I don't want to escalate and I'm giving you maximum warning, get out of the way. I'm just going to, bomb an empty field or bomb a rock or something. But I don't think that cuts much mustard with Iran.
I've never heard Iran say, we're going to attack an American target. We don't want to escalate. We're giving you warning. We won't do it to you personally. We'll do it to someone else. We don't want to escalate. But all that we hear from the Biden administration, we don't want to escalate.
Yeah, if you project
we won't
weakness,
attack Iran itself.
Yeah, if you project weakness. So supporting Israel, he projected strength by deploying 2 aircraft carriers. But in this retaliation, he's projected weakness. And if you project weakness, that's the lesson your enemies take.
But I'll tell you what, Donald Trump, for all his many failings, one thing that made him particularly effective internationally as a deterrent was that he seemed as mad as a cut snake. You didn't know what the hell he might do to you.
Absolutely.
And that made you be very cautious. Good warning. Greg Sheridan, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.
Look, after the break, our councils, seriously, what on earth are they doing? 2 amazing examples after this, plus some Lisa Wilkinson's latest excuse. I've got to tell you about that after this. I see our councils sometimes. You take Melbourne's Wyndham Council, which has decided to put up these photos for a gay festival. Photos that some users of that park find confronting. One actually told me their 4-year-old was even frightened. I mean, really, is that necessary in a park in the wide open spaces? But to another council. Now, I warned last year about Robbie Nyagai. He's worked for 2 Victorian Labor ministers and last year joined Melbourne's very woke Port Phillip Council. Now, his speech on joining the council, as I told you at the time, was amazing. A sign of our cultural decline, paying tribute to ancestral territory, the Blackfoot Confederacy of Canada, saying it was now on stolen land here in Australia, and saying that as a gay 31-year-old, he said, I sometimes cruise, I sometimes drink too much, and dirty dance, and I sometimes send nudes on Grindr, which is a dating app. He's now proposing a motion to the council to ask if they really should bother repairing the Captain Cook statue that was cut down in the early hours before Australia Day by vandals who want this supposed colony of Australia to fall. He wants the statue gone after 115 years. Joining me is another councillor at Port Phillip, former Mayor Marcus Pearl. Marcus, thank you so much for your time. Is the statue coming or going?
I personally think the statue should be reinstated as soon as possible, and I share that view with the Premier of Victoria, the Labor Premier of Victoria, who came out categorically and said that the statue should be replaced as soon as possible. This motion was put up late on Friday night. It's the first I heard of it, and many people in our community have been very surprised that this motion has been put up. So what are the chances? Because your council can do some strange things. We'll have to wait and see, but overwhelmingly the feedback I've been getting from local tradespeople, from local community members, is they do not want to reward vandalism. They do not want to reward violence. That's the issue, isn't it? That's the issue, because, I mean, otherwise you can vandalise a statue you don't like and win. And what next? How many other statues will fall? The average person on the street has deep respect for our country. We live in the greatest country on earth, and we want to have a respectful debate. We have a complex history like many countries have, but respectful debate and democracy are not violence and vandalism. And if we pass motions such as this, it's effectively endorsing that vandalism. Yeah, it sounds to me you're not quite sure of the numbers there. Who's this bloke? Well, he's a endorsed Labor councillor. He replaced the Greens councillor, Catherine Copsey, that was elected to the state upper house. He's been in Port Phillip for a year. He has some keen interests, but ultimately I'm surprised that this motion was put up at this meeting at such short notice without any form of negotiation or prior notice to his colleagues. It's very strange.
All right, and when's it being debated?
It's Wednesday night, so it's an important debate. It is a clear signal that potentially that Robbie has been open that he wants the statue not to be replaced. There's 9 councillors. It's always a delicate balance at Port Phillip. We'll see what happens, but personally, I'm very much aligned with the Labor Premier who's saying that this statue should be reinstated.
You keep yelling Labor at him, so maybe he'll get the message. But seriously, Marcus, I mean, what's in the water down at Port Phillip?
Well, we need to focus on things that are important to us. Cost of living pressures, local trade, and the economy still very much recovering from COVID. This does not help those things, and that's where most people at Port Phillip want our focus to be.
May I have one suggestion, one big thing? Revitalise Ackland Street, the beautiful street where I had my bucks night before my wedding to my beautiful wife. So please, if you could do something with that. Marcus Pell, all the strength to your right arm. Thank you so much indeed for your time. Oh, seriously. Now to a topic that for legal reasons I cannot fully discuss. The restrictions, honestly, that I find dangerous in stifling an important debate on immigration in this case. It happens all the time, by the way. Veileen White, a 70-year-old grandmother, was allegedly stabbed to death on Saturday in front of her 6-year-old in a car park of an Ipswich shopping centre. Her car was also allegedly stolen and then dumped a short distance away. Police said they were searching for young men of African appearance and this afternoon had arrested 3.
It is a cowardly crime like I have not seen in my time as a detective.
Now, to be very clear, these youths may be innocent. And for all we know, they were born here. But I am reminded again of a question I put with Victoria Police. First denied and then admitted it had a problem there with African gangs, which 5 years on they claim has been largely controlled. Even the ABC finally reported it.
People born in Sudan make up 0.1% of Victoria's population, but account for 1% of the state's alleged criminal offenders. Young Sudanese males are overrepresented in certain violent crimes, allegedly committing close to 10% of aggravated robberies.
And my question is this: why are our politicians too scared to consider, at least publicly, local factors in their homeland, behavioural ones, when letting in a lot of people from, say, war zones? Factors that might make it harder for some, a minority, to fit in. Now, none of these questions, of course, may apply in this case, and to repeat, these boys may be innocent, and in Victoria, police claim to have got on top of their problem. I've put in enough disclaimers here, but this shocking death may raise those questions here again, even if there are severe legal dangers in airing them. Joining me is the panel, Federal Liberal MP Garth Hamilton, Steve Chavura, Senior Lecturer in History at Campion College and co-author of The Forgotten Menzies. Now, Garth, you've raised on this very show the problems with youth crime in Queensland. This killing occurred just 80 kilometres down the road from your main office. How big a problem does Queensland have?
We have a terrible problem, Andrew, a genuinely terrible problem. And I just want to point out tonight there's a 6-year-old girl who recently just watched her grandmother die in a stabbing. That's a terrible thing to think about. You've just talked about war-torn countries and the impact that has on people. That's an Australian citizen, someone who's brought up here and has watched that happen on our soil. It's terribly confronting. And look, I have spoken about this on your show. I've spoken about this in Parliament. I don't know if you have this clip, but just last December I raised this in Parliament. And the member for Blair, Labor member Shane Newman, whose electorate borders the shopping centre where this took place, attacked me for doing that. In his view, I was fear-mongering. I was doing some.
Let me hold you up there. Let me hold you up there, Garth. My producer tells me we have that grab from Shane Newman, whose electorate includes Ipswich, where this alleged crime took place. Here he is.
The member for Groom should stick to his job as a federal MP rather than trying to help his Queensland LNP mates with scare campaigns on youth crime. When it comes to federal parliament, don't lecture us on basically state issues around youth crime and community safety. Get your facts right.
What do you say to that now, Garth?
Well, I look forward to his fulsome apology to the people of his electorate for not taking this issue seriously. And I look forward to him doing that 5 minutes before he announces his resignation. He's clearly not fit to be an elected representative of those people. When crimes like this are taking place, he's completely out of touch. The reason I was raising that in the federal sphere, we have control over the internet carriage services, and there's a clear link between what's posted online and the recruitment of young criminals coming through. We have a youth crime crisis. This is part of what is driving more and more young kids towards this sort of activity. So the member for Blair, rather than getting defensive and angry about this, should actually put a solution on the table like I've done, or walk away in disgrace.
Now, Steve Trevura, because 3 youths have now been arrested, we've got to let justice take its course. So we're going to move on to another topic. But honestly, this is so shocking. Back to those Victoria Police, in fact, Steve. Its leadership has for decades now been very woke, and this year its commissioner led yet another contingent of this time of 100 police in the Midsummer Pride Marches, LBTQ and all the other acronyms after, in St Kilda, where they were surrounded by about 50 radical gay activists, some wearing pigs' heads, some throwing paint over the police, others pushing and swearing and mucking around with the pipe band, and many chanting "Police kill gays." The police chief was furious. Here he is.
What we saw from an ugly rabble, they may call themselves protesters, but it was an ugly rabble, a group who came there obviously with intent to confront and, if not to attack police, to threaten them.
Stephen, to me, what this is telling me is woke doesn't work. Being woke doesn't work. Why wouldn't it?
Well, because wokeness ultimately derives from Marxist-inspired philosophies, and wokeness is not just a mild critique of Western civilization and its institutions like the police. It is an attempt really to overthrow all of these institutions, like what you had in America with the Black Lives Matter movement. It was about not so much reforming the police, but defunding the police entirely. And so whenever the police or any other institution seeks to sort of offer an olive branch to woke mobs, all they're really doing is feeding a beast that seeks nothing more than to see that institution, the police in particular, in Marxist theory, overthrown. And so really we ought to not be trying to appease wokeism, we ought to be opposing it as the anti-family, anti-rule of law, anti-police radical ideology that it is.
I also think there's a thing here, Garth, that wokedom is a competition. It's a power flex. I'm more sensitive than you. I can see offences even when you can't, and therefore I'm more moral than you. And eventually that game doesn't work anymore with people like me and maybe you and certainly Steve, because we've heard it all, blah, 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 blah. It only works for people already in wokedom, so they turn on their own. Every revolution eats its own. What do you make of that, seeing this footage?
Well, it's quite frankly disappointing to see our police being treated like that. You know, this is a game of victimhood, isn't it? You know, to see who has the biggest axe to grind on these issues. And it goes nowhere. It leads nowhere. There is no end to this game. You know, this just keeps going on and on and on. The next claim at victimhood takes place. But look, you know, I guess I want to ask Andrew just how woke your Bucks party was, but I won't take you there. But it does raise this funny thing.
Very sedate. It was at the Danube, because I like Middle European food, and no, it was fantastic. Chicken Kiev I had. Thank you for asking. But yeah, look, you know, this is the wokest police force, as you well know, Steve. I mean, this is the police force that, to its shame, charged Cardinal George Pell with 26 alleged, charges of sexually attacking children, not one of which ended up standing up in court. Not one. They were utterly ludicrous, and not one police officer has lost their job for putting that innocent man through that torment, which included in the end more than a year in jail for a crime he did not commit. To be honest, you know, sort of the police. I'm feeling sympathy, a bit of trouble, dragging a tear from my eye at seeing these scenes, although I should.
Yeah, well, again, wokeness is not just some abstract problem out there. It undermines important institutions like the rule of law, as I mentioned earlier. And the Pell case was a perfect example. That sort of Pell had all the signs of an oppression according to woke ideology. He was male, he was a Christian, and he was a priest. And so could you be more oppressive? He couldn't possibly be innocent. And wokeness really just corroded that case to the point where it seriously undermined one of the key institutions of Western civilization, the rule of law.
Absolutely. And Steve, just staying with you for a sec, gas the Jews controversy. New South Wales Police said after weeks and weeks of investigation, the crowd that was heard chanting, allegedly, gas the Jews, was actually chanting, where's the Jews? I must say, I differ with some of my Sky News hosts. I think they're probably right, but I'll leave it to the audience to decide. Here are those chants of a very ugly demonstration. Steve, I think I do hear where's the Jews, but I don't know if it makes it any better, does it? I mean, pro-Palestinian groups, left-wing outlets like Krakue say, aha, big black eye for the Australian Jewish Association, and and journalists have heard them say gas the Jews, but is it?
Where have we got to in this country? What has happened over the years where we are now debating whether a threatening mob is saying gas the Jews or where's the Jews? I completely agree with you. It sounds to me like they're saying where's the Jews. Now, why are they asking where's the Jews? Do they want to throw an impromptu bar mitzvah? No, this is a threat. It is a threat. And here's the thing, the anti-Semitism issue that we have in Australia right now is actually deeper. It's an immigration issue. And for decades, we have pursued a very irresponsible immigration policy that's prioritised the economy over social cohesion. And we had a lot of immigration from various cultural regions after World War II. But it was all done under a policy of assimilation, not multiculturalism, and the emphasis was on social cohesion. True. And so this is really shows how an irresponsible immigration policy actually does lead to really dangerous consequences. And what we need to do is get rid of multiculturalism, bring back the policy of immigration, of assimilation, and actually care about the kinds of cultural communities that our immigration policy is creating, because that is a very ugly scene and very dangerous.
Garth Hamilton, Stephen Trevura, thank you both so much for your time. Listen, I was amazed today to read Lisa Wilkinson's latest defence sent to the judge in Wilkinson's written submission after being sued for allegedly defaming Bruce Lehrmann, the former Liberal staffer accused of raping colleague Brittany Higgins in Parliament House. A rape, by the way, that's never been proved. Now, Lehrmann is suing over a report that Wilkinson presented on Channel 10 that he says identified him. But Wilkinson now says through her barrister, well, actually she had only a limited role in producing the final broadcast and couldn't be expected to fact-check some of Higgins' claims. It goes on, her role in relation to the final broadcast was to read the pre-prepared script. She acted not only reasonably in reading that pre-prepared script, but perfectly in that she read it word for word. So, if that's all she is, a glorified script reader, then why did Wilkinson grab the logie for that report that went to air and say this?
The logie goes to the Brittany Higgins interview, the project.
Thank you so much for this incredible honour. This interview and this story is by far the most important work I have ever done.
Why did she say, no, a terrible mistake. It wasn't me. Please, guys, you come up the stage. It was you that did it. I mean, seriously, all credit, no responsibility. After the break, who's minding the door in Britain as well? And how did it let in an Afghan sex offender? And why can't it now find him after an alleged horrific acid attack on a woman that burned his own face too? Now to an amazing case in Britain that again asks a question I keep putting here. Who let them in? Police are searching for this man and somehow can't find him, even though he apparently has half his face burnt off. The man is wanted for an acid attack on a woman and her 2 daughters. The woman is gravely injured. Joining me from London is Esther Krakue, broadcaster, author, writer. Esther, thanks for your time, but what is stunning about this alleged barbaric crime is that this wanted man, Abdul Yazidi, is an Afghan refugee who was allowed to stay in your country even after being convicted of a sex attack? How on earth does that happen?
I mean, these are the kinds of stories that basically beg a belief. But yes, Abdul Yazidi was rejected twice for asylum and was allowed to stay on the 3rd time, even after he had a sexual assault conviction, because he allegedly converted to Christianity, which is a backdoor route a lot of migrants, particularly from Muslim-majority countries, use to stay in the UK, because they allege that if they return to their home country, they'll face prosecution. Now, no, he didn't have to do any tests to attest to this. He didn't have to do anything to show that he was actually of the Christian faith. He just had a priest who testified on his behalf that he somehow converted to Christianity, and he was allowed to stay in this country and carry out this barbaric attack. And what has shocked the country even more is that on a BBC programme last week, you had 2 MPs talking about the fact that this wasn't about the fact that he was an asylum seeker or, well, refugee now, and that he was in the UK. It was about misogyny against women. They're not talking about the fact that the victim of this attack was a woman, and actually letting people like this into the country with these ridiculous rules is what actually hurts women. It was incredible. They were talking about microaggressions when you have a woman whose face has been burnt off with this corrosive substance. It was absolutely incredible. I mean, this man is being looked for by the police at the moment, but I don't even think they'll find him alive, because CCTV footage around London showed he also had basically half his face burnt off by this alkaline substance he used to attack this woman and her children. But I think this highlights a bigger issue of who is actually running this country. It's not the politicians. It's these, charity organizations and supranational courts like the ECHR that are allowing, at the moment, 12,000 foreign national offenders to remain in the UK and not be allowed to be deported for all sorts of reasons. I mean, we have literally terrorist sympathizers that are not allowed to be deported because apparently the country that they'll be deported to, they won't receive adequate medical care, as if that is our problem. So now they're allowed to stay in the UK and commit these sorts of crimes, and our politicians are completely ignoring it. It's the kind of stuff that just honestly makes me sick.
And of course, I now read a lot of other Muslim refugees alleged. Funny that almost all of them are men, young men. In one particular facility, about 40 of them are converting to Christianity too. Isn't Christianity wonderful, Esther? I mean, so immediately obvious to people wanting asylum.
Yeah, they're completely gaming the system. That's how broken our asylum system is. And the thing is, we're not taking the threats to our national security seriously. Since 1998, 1 in 5 people committed of terrorist offences have had an asylum background. We're not talking about this threat. We're not taking it seriously. The fact that people can allegedly convert to Christianity to stay in this country, even though they pose a threat to our national security, these are the kinds of things that people need to be talking about. But apparently we're talking about the threat of microaggressions and how it's holding women back, not the fact that we're having our faces melted off by barbaric men like this.
And let's not forget that the acid attacks, you don't actually get that many people who are British-born, long-time British families doing that. It's quite specific, it seems. Esther, just quickly, our government appointed a Minister for the Republic saying he fancied his chances when the Queen died and Charles took over. But looking at the latest popularity poll for the royal family, it seems the King and Queen are in great shape and going nowhere, and the King after them, Prince William, is very, very popular.
Yeah, so the Republican movement in this country has stayed at around 20% of the general population. So by and large, the population has always been in support of the royal family. I think the King's openness about his surgery and how he's basically done that to advocate for men to get their prostates checked out has really kind of shone a light on the actual value of the institution. The King enjoys favourability polling numbers that most politicians could only dream of. It usually around 60 to 70%. And, it shows the value of the royal family, not just kind of as an institution, but actually what the public role is. And I think, obviously, the fact that Queen Camilla has stepped up, is now the most senior working royal since Kate is now out of action. It just shows the actual value of the monarchy.
Yes, the most popular is actually Prince William, just followed by his wife, and Charles is, I think, after that. Esther Krakue, thank you so much indeed for your time. Lovely talking to you. See you next week. That's it from me. Coming up next is Tanika DiGiorgio, who's been having a very busy time at Sky with Shari. Good night.